The Alpha King froze when his daughter suddenly screamed, because she wasn't supposed to hear a single sound. And when the maid revealed what was buried deep in the princess's ear, he realized someone inside the fortress had been lying for years. But who would dare sabotage the royal heir? Before I begin, listen carefully, because what the maid finds inside the Alpha King's daughter isn't just shocking, it changes everything. Stay with me till the end of this story. The truth behind the princess's 7 years of silence is more heartbreaking and more dangerous than anyone in the kingdom ever dared to imagine. The stone columns of Grey Pine Fortress rose like ancient sentinels against the winter sky, their surfaces carved with the history of 1,000 battles. Wolf banners hung from iron brackets, swaying gently in the cold drafts that whispered through the great hall. Torches blazed in their sconces, casting dancing shadows across the weathered flags that lined the corridor leading to the throne room. Alpha King Hardalukas stood motionless before his throne, his massive frame draped in wolf pelts that spoke of countless hunts. His dark beard, streaked with silver earned through decades of warfare, framed a face carved by both victory and sorrow. Beneath thick brows, his eyes, once fierce enough to break enemy lines, now held only one expression as they watched the small figure playing on the stone floor: tenderness and guilt. Princess Ra'nana sat cross-legged on a fur rug near the great hearth, her golden hair catching the firelight like spun wheat at harvest. The blue embroidered gown she wore had been a gift from the seamstresses of the northern packs, its delicate stitching a sharp contrast to the brutal stone fortress around her. She arranged wooden wolf figurines in careful patterns, her small hands moving with the patience of a child who had learned to find joy in silence. 7 years. 7 winters had passed since the night she came into this world and took her mother with her into the next. 7 years since Hardalukas had held his newborn daughter and whispered promises to his dying mate, promises he had failed to keep. The memories returned unbidden, as they always did. The healers with their bitter tonics and sacred oils. The rune masters who carved symbols into stone and chanted beneath the full moon. The wolf shamans who claimed they could hear the spirits speak, yet could do nothing for one small girl who heard nothing at all. Moon priests had blessed her, anointed her, prayed over her until Hardalukas' treasury ran thin with gold paid for empty hope. Nothing.
No cure. No miracle.
The kingdom whispered what Hardalukas believed in his darkest hours. The moon goddess herself had cursed the child. Punishment for the blood he had spilled in his youth, for the villages he had burned, for the rival packs he had crushed beneath his conquest. His sins, written in the silence of his daughter's world. Ra'nana looked up suddenly, her bright eyes finding her father across the hall. She smiled, a pure, innocent expression that pierced his heart like silver, and gestured with her hands in the language they had built together through years of necessity. Her movements asked a question he had learned to read. "Are you watching?" He nodded, forcing his weathered face into something resembling warmth. She returned to her play, moving one wolf figurine toward another. The fire crackled and popped behind her. Hardalukas knew she felt the vibrations through the stone floor, felt the tremor of footsteps, the rumble of thunder, the pulse of life happening around her. But sound itself? The actual voices, laughter, music that filled his world? For her, there was only silence. As he watched, Ra'nana paused. Her hand rose to her left ear, tugging at it with a small wince crossing her delicate features. She shook her head as if trying to dislodge water after swimming, then returned to her toys. Hardalukas made a mental note to summon the healers again. They would examine her, find nothing, charge him more gold, and leave with the same empty diagnosis they always gave. Born deaf. The curse cannot be broken. The Alpha King closed his eyes and exhaled slowly, the weight of failure pressing down on his broad shoulders like an invisible mountain. He would never stop trying, never stop searching, even if it broke him. The morning fog clung to the fortress gates like a living thing when Mela arrived, her worn leather satchel clutched against her chest. Her dress, simple brown homespun, patched at the elbows, marked her as common folk, far removed from the polished world beyond those iron-reinforced doors. She had wrapped her dark hair in a modest cloth, though a few stubborn strands escaped to frame her tired face. Her hands trembled, not from the cold, but from desperation. Behind her, 2 days' journey away, her younger brother Aaron lay fevered and coughing in their village cottage. The herbalist had done what she could, but the sickness required medicine Mela couldn't afford. Real medicine, the kind only silver could buy. So she had come to Grey Pine, where the Alpha King's household was known to pay servants well. The chief steward who met her in the servants' hall was a severe woman named Bronwyn, her gray hair pulled tight, her eyes sharp as flint. She looked Mela up and down with obvious skepticism. "You have no references," Bronwyn stated flatly, tapping the crude application letter Mela had managed to write.
No, ma'am.
"But I'm a hard worker. I can clean, cook, mend. The princess's chambers need an attendant." Bronwyn's tone carried warning. "The position has particular challenges. The child doesn't speak, doesn't hear. Most girls can't manage the patience required." Mela straightened her shoulders. "I raised my brother from infancy after our mother passed. Patience is something I understand." Something shifted in Bronwyn's expression, not quite warmth, but perhaps recognition. After a long pause, she nodded curtly. "You start today. Touch nothing without permission. Speak to no one above your station. And remember, this is the Alpha King's only child." The weight of that statement settled over Mela like a heavy cloak. The princess's chambers were warmer than Mela had expected, filled with afternoon light streaming through tall windows. Tapestries depicting silver wolves beneath full moons covered the stone walls, and toys lay scattered across imported rugs. Princess Runana sat on a cushioned window seat, her golden hair tangled, her blue eyes distant. When Mela entered and curtsied, the child barely glanced at her. "Your Highness," Mela said softly, though she knew the words went unheard. "I'm here to help." Runana's gaze flickered to Mela's hands, then away, dismissive, guarded. This was a child accustomed to strangers poking and prodding, promising cures that never came. Mela moved slowly, non-threateningly. She picked up a silver hairbrush from the vanity and held it where Runana could see. Then she waited. Minutes passed. Finally, the princess turned slightly, offering tacit permission. Mela worked with gentle strokes, careful not to pull. Her fingers moved through the golden strands with practiced ease, separating them into sections for braiding. Runana's small shoulders gradually relaxed. When Mela finished the braid and tied it with a blue ribbon, she caught movement in her peripheral vision. Alpha King Hardalukas stood in the doorway, silent as death itself. His massive frame filled the entrance, his dark eyes fixed not on Mela, but on his daughter's unusually peaceful expression. Their eyes met. Mela's heart hammered. He crossed the room in 3 strides and leaned close, his voice low, dangerous, absolute. "If any harm comes to the princess, it will be your life." Mela swallowed hard but met his gaze steadily. "I understand, Your Majesty." Something unreadable passed through the Alpha King's expression before he turned and left without another word. Mela exhaled shakily, her hands still trembling. But when she looked down, Runana was watching her with something new in those bright blue eyes.
Trust.
The great hall's hearth roared with winter fire 3 weeks after Mela's arrival, filling the stone chamber with warmth that pushed back against the frost creeping across the fortress windows. Princess Runana sat on a cushioned stool before the flames, her golden hair loose and flowing down her back like a waterfall of silk. Mela knelt behind her, the silver hairbrush moving in slow, rhythmic strokes. This had become their morning ritual, a quiet communion that required no words, only presence. The princess had grown comfortable with her touch, even leaning back slightly into Mela's gentle ministrations. Then Ra'nana flinched. The movement was sharp, sudden. Her small hand flew to her left ear, pressing against it as a soft whimper escaped her lips, a sound so rare and pained that Mela's heart clenched. "Princess," Mela whispered, setting the brush aside immediately. She moved around to face the child, her hands raised in a calming gesture. "What hurts?" Ra'nana's blue eyes were wide, glistening with unshed tears. Her fingers tugged at her earlobe, and her face contorted in discomfort. Mela reached gently toward the child's ear, but Ra'nana jerked back violently. Her hands began moving in frantic gestures, the private language she shared with her father. Though Mela didn't know all the signs, the meaning was unmistakable. Not the healers. Please, not the healers. The terror in those small eyes told stories Mela had only heard whispered among the servants. The royal physicians who had examined Ra'nana since infancy. The procedures that left her screaming silently, thrashing against strong hands that held her down. Burning salves applied to her skin. Sharp instruments probed into her ears while moon priests chanted words that meant nothing to a frightened child who couldn't hear them. 7 years of pain disguised as hope. "Shush, sweetheart," Mela breathed, her voice soft as silk even though she knew Ra'nana couldn't hear it. The tone mattered. The gentleness mattered. She placed her hand over her own heart, then extended it palm up toward the princess, a gesture of trust they'd developed. Ra'nana hesitated, tears spilling down her cheeks. Mela waited, patient as stone. Finally, the princess lowered her defensive hands. Moving with infinite care, Mela guided Ra'nana toward the lamplight streaming through the tall windows. She tilted the child's head gently, angling her ear toward the brightness. The princess trembled, but didn't pull away. At first, Mela saw nothing unusual, just the delicate curve of a child's ear, perfect and pink. Then she looked deeper. Her breath caught in her throat. There, lodged far inside the ear canal, barely visible even in the strong morning light, was something dark, something solid, a hardened mass that shouldn't exist, pressed deep against the inner workings of the ear itself. Mela's hands began to shake. How had no one seen this? How had the kingdom's greatest healers, with their magnifying crystals and their sacred sight, missed something so obvious? Unless they hadn't missed it at all. The thought sent ice through her veins. Ra'nana whimpered again, softer this time, her small hand reaching up to touch Mela's wrist in question. The maid realized her expression must have changed, must have shown the shock coursing through her. She forced her features into calmness, into the gentle mask the princess needed. Her mind, however, raced like wolves in a hunt. She had 2 choices: summon the healers who had failed this child for 7 years, or— Mela swallowed hard, her heart hammering against her ribs. Or break every law that governed a common maid's place in this fortress. Ra'nana watched her with those trusting blue eyes, waiting. And Mela made her decision. Mela's thoughts spiraled like autumn leaves caught in a storm. She should summon the king. Protocol demanded it. A servant, especially one so newly employed, had no business making decisions about the royal heir's health. One word to the guards stationed outside the great hall, and physicians would swarm the princess within minutes. But Ra'nana's fingers dug into Mela's sleeve with desperate strength. The child's face had gone pale, her eyes wide with the kind of primal terror that came from repeated trauma. She shook her head violently, her golden braid whipping across her shoulders. Her small body trembled as silent sobs racked through her, tears streaming down cheeks that had known too much pain for 7 short years.
Please. No healers. Please.
The unspoken plea hung in the air between them. Mela's mind raced through consequences like a merchant counting coin. If she reported this and the healers failed again, nothing changed. If she attempted something herself and succeeded, she might save the princess. But if she tried and failed, If she caused harm, if blood was spilled, if the Alpha King discovered a common maid had dared touch his daughter's body without permission, if any harm comes to the princess, it will be your life. Hardalucas's words echoed in her memory, spoken in that low, dangerous rumble that promised absolute retribution. Her execution would be swift, probably merciful, given the king's reputation for honor. But execution nonetheless. And Aaron, her little brother, fevered and coughing in their distant village cottage, would die without the medicine her wages could buy. The herbalist had given him 2 months, perhaps 3. Without Mela's income, he wouldn't last one. She closed her eyes briefly, her chest tight with conflicting duties. Then she looked again at Renana's ear, tilting the child's head once more toward the lamplight. The dark mass was clearly visible now that she knew where to look.
Hardened.
Waxy. Definitely physical, not some mystical curse or divine punishment. No moon magic resided there. No goddess's wrath. Just something solid and real and entirely removable. Something the healers should have found years ago. The realization steadied her shaking hands. This wasn't beyond her capability. It was simply beyond her station. Mela made her choice. She reached into the pocket of her apron and withdrew a bone hairpin, one she'd carried since her mother's death, its tip worn smooth and sharp from years of use. It had pinned countless braids, secured heavy loads of laundry, even served as a makeshift sewing needle when thread needed emergency repair. Now it would serve a far more dangerous purpose. She knelt before Renana, meeting those tear-filled blue eyes directly. Placing one hand over her own heart, Mela then touched the princess's chest gently, a gesture they'd established to mean trust me. Then she held up the hairpin where Renana could see it, pointing carefully to the child's ear, then to the pin, then back to the ear. The message was clear. I want to help. It will hurt, but I think I can fix this. Renana's breathing was rapid, panicked. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. But slowly, so slowly Mela's heart nearly broke watching, the princess nodded. Permission granted. Mela exhaled a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Her hands steadied with purpose now, the decision made and accepted. She guided Renana to sit directly before the roaring hearth, where firelight would supplement the morning sun. The princess settled onto the fur rug, tilting her head as Mela positioned her. Mela whispered, though the words went unheard, "Moon goddess, give me steady hands." Then she leaned close, hairpin poised, and began the act that would either save them both or condemn her to death. Mela's hand moved with the precision of a mother tending a newborn's fragile body. The bone hairpin entered the ear canal slowly, so slowly that each fraction of movement felt like an eternity, compressed into a single breath. Renana's small fingers gripped the carved arm of the stool with white-knuckled intensity. Her whole body trembled like a leaf in winter wind, but she held perfectly still, trusting despite her terror. The firelight danced across them both, casting long shadows against the stone walls. Mela felt the hairpin make contact with something solid. Not flesh, not bone. Something foreign and hard, lodged where it had no right to be. She adjusted her angle carefully, working the tip of the pin beneath the mass, applying the gentlest pressure. It shifted. Renana's breathing hitched, her eyes squeezing shut. "Almost there, sweetheart," Mela whispered, though her own hands shook now. Almost. She hooked the edge of the obstruction and began to pull, slowly, steadily, praying to every deity she'd ever heard named. The mass resisted. Then, with a sensation Mela felt more than heard, it released. Out came a dark, solid lump, waxy and compacted, coated with what looked like ancient herbs that had hardened into stone over years of neglect. It was grotesque in its simplicity, no larger than a dried pea, yet it had stolen 7 years of sound from a child's world. Renana's mouth opened, and she screamed. The sound tore through the great hall, raw, shocked, utterly audible. Not the silent cry of a deaf child, but a real, vocal scream that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. Then she froze. If your heart just dropped, you're not alone. Hit the like button so I know you felt that moment too, the moment everything changed. Tell me in the comments, what do you think the king will do when he learns the truth? Her eyes went impossibly wide, her scream cutting off mid-breath. Her small hands flew to her throat, feeling the vibration there, a vibration she'd made countless times before, but never with this result. The fire crackled behind them, logs shifting and sending sparks spiraling upward. Renana's head whipped toward the hearth. The iron chandelier above them creaked slightly as wind whistled through a high window. Her gaze snapped upward. Mela's shaky breathing, her soft gasp of relief. The princess turned to stare at the maid with an expression of absolute wonder.
Sound.
Real, actual, heard sound was flooding into her mind for the first time in her conscious life. The world had suddenly gained a dimension she'd never known existed, transforming from silent vibrations into a symphony of noise. Tears streamed down Renana's face, not from pain now, but from overwhelming sensation. Her lips moved, testing, experimenting. Her throat worked as she tried to form shapes she'd seen others make, but never understood the purpose of. The first word came out barely louder than breath, trembling and uncertain, but perfectly clear. Father. The single word hung in the air like a prayer answered. Mela's composure shattered. Tears of relief and disbelief poured down her cheeks as she pressed her hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. 7 years. 7 years of silence, broken by one word spoken in a child's wondering voice. Yes, Mela choked out, nodding frantically even as she wept. Yes, your father. You can hear yourself.
You can hear me.
Oh, blessed moon goddess, you can hear. Renana's expression transformed into pure joy mixed with confusion and fear and excitement all tangled together. She touched her ears with both hands, feeling them as if for the first time. Then she spoke again, louder, testing the miracle. Father. And somewhere in the distant corridors of Grey Pine Fortress, heavy footsteps began to run. The great hall doors exploded inward with a crash that shook the iron chandelier. Alpha King Hardalukas filled the entrance, his massive chest heaving, eyes blazing with predatory gold. The transformation had already begun, fangs elongating, muscles rippling beneath his tunic as his wolf surged to the surface. He had heard something impossible, his daughter's scream, echoing through corridors that had known only her silence. His gaze swept the scene in an instant. Renana, tears streaming down her face, trembling. Mela, kneeling before her, a sharpened bone pin clutched in her fingers. Blood, a thin streak of crimson staining the maid's hand.
No!
The roar that tore from Hardalukas's throat was pure alpha dominance, shaking the very stones of the fortress. His eyes fixed on Mela with murderous intent. Guards, armored soldiers poured through the doorway behind him. She can hear. Mela shrieked, scrambling to her feet, hands raised in desperate supplication. Your Majesty, please. The princess can hear. But Hardalukas saw only betrayal. Only his daughter's tears and a common maid with a weapon and blood. The warnings he'd ignored, the trust he'd foolishly given, all of it crystallized into white-hot rage. Seize her, he commanded, his voice breaking into a growl. To the dungeons. Guards grabbed Mela's arms, wrenching them behind her back. The bone hairpin clattered to the stone floor.
No.
No, you don't understand. Mela struggled against the iron grip, her eyes wild. Look at what I removed. Please, just look. Renana's mouth opened, her small face contorted with effort. She was trying to speak, trying to form words she'd only just learned to hear, but panic made her tongue clumsy. Sounds came out garbled, meaningless. The guards dragged Mela toward the door. She twisted in their grip, reaching desperately toward the princess. Tell him, Ra'nana, tell him. The child's frustration peaked. Her hands balled into fists, and from somewhere deep inside, from 7 years of silence finally given voice, she drew breath and screamed the only word that mattered. Father. The word rang through the great hall like a bell struck by lightning. Everything stopped. Every guard froze mid-step. Every breath caught. Every heartbeat seemed to pause. Hardalukas turned slowly, his golden eyes fading back to human brown, his face draining of color. His daughter, his silent, cursed daughter, had just called his name. With her voice. The royal infirmary reeked of medicinal herbs and cold stone. Mela knelt on the floor, iron shackles binding her wrists, flanked by grim-faced guards. Before her stood the council of physicians, 5 robed figures whose combined knowledge was supposed to serve the crown without question. Alpha King Hardalukas stood at the head of the chamber, Princess Ra'nana clutched protectively in his arms. The child's face was still wet with tears, but her eyes were alert, listening to every sound around her with wonder that hadn't dimmed. The king's voice was dangerously quiet. Was my daughter truly born deaf? The eldest physician, a silver-haired man named Corvain, shifted uncomfortably. Your Majesty, we would need to examine. Then examine her.
Now.
Corvain approached with visible reluctance. He tilted Ra'nana's head gently, peering into the ear Mela had treated. His expression changed immediately from professional detachment to barely concealed alarm. Well, Hardalukas' patience was a fraying thread. The canal is clear, Corvain admitted slowly. Unobstructed. And the object the maid removed? The king gestured to the waxy mass, now resting on a silver tray. Another physician, younger, lifted it with trembling fingers. Hardened birth herbs, she whispered, mixed with wax and compacted over years. It's standard practice to pack the ears during difficult births to prevent fluid. It should have dissolved naturally. Corvain interrupted sharply, shooting her a warning glance. But it didn't. Hardalukas' words fell like stones. And you knew. Silence stretched taut as bowstrings. Answer me. The Alpha's roar shook the vaulted ceiling. Corvain's composure cracked. His shoulders sagged, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of damning truth. We saw signs. During the second examination, when the princess was 8 months old. Blockage. Possible obstruction. And you said nothing. You were desperate, Your Majesty. The words came out strangled. The treasury opened. Gold flowed freely for treatments, consultations, rituals. We told ourselves perhaps the blockage would clear naturally, or perhaps it wasn't the cause, or... You grew rich on my daughter's suffering. Hardalukas' voice had gone flat, empty. On my grief. Corvain's had bowed. No defense came. The Alpha King swayed slightly, as if struck. His eyes, those fierce eyes that had stared down enemy armies, filled with tears. He looked at Ra'nana, then at the physicians who had betrayed them both, then at his own hands, as if seeing blood there. 7 years, he whispered brokenly. 7 years, I believed the moon goddess cursed her.
Cursed me.
I carried that guilt like iron chains. His knees buckled. The mightiest Alpha in the realm sank to the stone floor, still holding his daughter, and wept. Guards, he managed through his grief. Arrest them. All of them. The physicians were seized immediately, their protests falling on deaf ears. Mela remained kneeling in her shackles, forgotten for the moment, watching the king break apart. The physicians were dragged from the chamber, their protests echoing down the corridor until heavy doors silenced them. The remaining guards stood rigid, unsure where to look as their Alpha King wept openly, his shoulders shaking with the release of 7 years' worth of grief and guilt. Gradually, Hardalukas' breathing steadied. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and rose to his full height, still cradling Ra'nana against his chest. His gaze found Mela, still kneeling in chains on the cold stone floor. She met his eyes and saw her death there. She had broken royal protocol, touched the princess without permission, performed a medical procedure without authority. That she had saved Renana's hearing wouldn't matter under the law. She had overstepped boundaries no common maid should cross. Mela lifted her chin, determined to face her execution with dignity. At least Erin would receive the wages she'd already earned. At least she had given one child back her hearing, even if she couldn't save her brother. Hardalukas walked toward her slowly, his footsteps heavy. Then, to the audible gasps of every guard present, the Alpha King of Greypine sank to his knees before her. I level, equal, unthinkable. Forgive me. His voice was raw, stripped of all royal command. Just a father speaking to the woman who had saved his daughter. I nearly killed you for the greatest act of mercy my child has ever known. Mela's throat closed. Tears she'd been holding back spilled free. I trusted monsters in physicians' robes and threatened the one person who truly saw her. Hardaluka's hands trembled as he reached for Renana. Tell them, little one. Tell them who helped you. Renana, still nestled in her father's arms, turned her bright eyes toward Mela. Her small voice, still uncertain and wonder-filled, shaped the syllables carefully. Mela. The maid's name, spoken aloud for the first time. Fresh tears coursed down Mela's cheeks. Hardalukas nodded to the nearest guard. Remove her chains.
Now.
Iron shackles fell away with metallic clangs that rang through the chamber. Mela rubbed her wrists, hardly daring to believe she still lived. The Alpha King remained kneeling, an act so unprecedented that several guards exchanged bewildered glances. How can I repay you? Hardalukas asked quietly. Name anything within my power, and it's yours. Though I know nothing can truly. Before Mela could answer, Renana squirmed from her father's arms and launched herself at the maid. Small arms wrapped around Mela's neck, clinging with desperate affection. The princess buried her face in Mela's shoulder and refused to let go. Mela, she repeated, the word muffled but clear. Mela, stay. Hardalukas watched his daughter, his miracle daughter who could finally hear and speak, choose her protector. And for the first time in 7 years, something like hope softened the harsh lines of his face. Dawn broke over Greypine Fortress with light that seemed somehow brighter than before, streaming through the tall windows and painting the stone halls in shades of gold and amber. Word had spread through the fortress like wildfire during the night. The silent princess had spoken. By mid-morning, the great courtyard overflowed with pack members, servants, soldiers, and common folk who had traveled from the surrounding villages. They stood beneath wolf banners that snapped in the crisp wind, their faces turned expectantly toward the balcony where their Alpha King would address them. Hardalukas emerged with Renana held securely in his arms, Mela standing just behind them in a new dress, simple but finely made, befitting her new station. The crowd's murmur fell to reverent silence. My people, Hardalukas began, his deep voice carrying across the courtyard. For 7 years, I believed my daughter cursed. For 7 years, I sought answers in magic and moon rituals, while the truth lay hidden by those I trusted most. His jaw tightened. The royal physicians have been imprisoned for their betrayal. Angry mutters rippled through the assembly. But today is not about darkness. The Alpha King's expression softened as he looked at Renana. Today, we celebrate light. This woman, he gestured to Mela, a maid with no title, no bloodline, no training in medicine, saw what trained healers refused to acknowledge. She risked her life to save my daughter's hearing. He raised his voice to a commanding proclamation. From this day forward, Mela of the village of Thornwick is declared guardian of the princess and friend of the crown. She is under my personal protection. Any who harm her answer to me. The courtyard erupted in cheers. Voices rose in celebration, calling Mela's name with genuine affection and gratitude. Mela stood frozen, overwhelmed, as the sound washed over her. Beside her, Renana's eyes were wide with delight, hearing the roar of her father's people for the first time. The princess clapped her small hands over her ears experimentally, then removed them, giggling at the difference. Later that evening, as the celebrations continued in the halls below, Hardalukas sat with his daughter in her chambers. The fire crackled warmly. Renana was learning to identify each sound, pointing excitedly whenever she recognized something new. Wolves howled in the distant forests, their evening song carrying through the open window. Renana's head snapped toward the sound, wonder lighting her face. "What?" she asked, the words still awkward on her tongue. "Wolves," Hardalukas said softly, pointing to the window. "Our people." She listened, enthralled, as the haunting melody rose and fell. Then she turned to her father, placed her small hand on his bearded cheek, and spoke with perfect clarity. "Father." Not a question, not an experiment. A declaration of love and recognition. Hardalukas's vision blurred. He pulled his daughter close, pressing his forehead to hers as tears streamed freely down his face. Not tears of grief this time, but of joy, pure and overwhelming. "My daughter," he whispered. "My precious girl." The moon goddess had not cursed him, he realized. His own pride, his blind trust in titles and reputations rather than truth, had bound him in darkness. It took a humble maid with nothing but compassion to break those chains. Outside, the celebrations continued. Inside, a family healed. And so began a new chapter for Grapevine, the era in which truth, not fear, guided the throne. If this story pulled you deep into its world, subscribe. I post werewolf and supernatural stories filled with secrets, betrayal, and emotional twists every week. And don't stop here. The next upload carries a secret even heavier than the one hidden inside the princess's ear, so stay tuned. Thank you so much for listening. It really means a lot, and I am very grateful. See you guys in the next video.